Staring downward with a strained expression, the beautiful bride quietly resigns herself to her current predicament. She justifies the bizarre situation by reminding herself that the Marquis Salvert is a highly trusted figure within the royal family. A sharply dressed steward matter-of-factly informs the bride that her new husband is an exceptionally busy person. The narrative highlights the shocking absurdity that the husband himself is absent from his own wedding. Forcing a polite smile, the lonely bride graciously admits that his absence is indeed hard to understand. A flashback reveals Lisette standing quietly in the background while the aloof Marquis stands prominently in the foreground. In a quiet study, her father solemnly reveals that Marc Leonardo Salvert has suddenly submitted a marriage proposal for her. Utterly shocked by the prestigious name, Lisette recalls a grand social gathering from her memories. At that lively ballroom, excited noblewomen eagerly point out the arrival of the highly sought-after Lord Leonardo. The narrative describes him as a strikingly beautiful man whose dazzling features make everyone in the room turn their heads. As other women swoon over the high-ranking noble with royal blood, Lisette simply observes his blinding presence from afar. Keeping her distance, the humble wallflower resigns herself to the fact that he exists in a completely different world than a poor noble like her. Suddenly, Lord Leonardo shifts his intense gaze directly toward her, catching the unassuming girl completely off guard. Flustered by his unexpected attention, Lisette swiftly decides she should step back and try not to get in his way. Brushing off the intense encounter, she delightedly turns her attention to the delicious-looking meat, dismissing any romantic possibilities. Snapping back to the present conversation, a bewildered Lisette questions why Marquis Salvert is interested in her. She anxiously asks her father why such an honorable and high-status proposal would ever come to their modest, struggling house. Realizing the pragmatic truth, she understands that he simply needs an official partner to support his demanding work. Her father explains that despite Leonardo's excellence, influential people hesitate to entrust major jobs to a young man who hasn't settled down. Because the busy Marquis begrudges the time it takes to court prideful, high-ranking noble ladies, he sought a more convenient arrangement. Ultimately, he desires a quiet, obedient, ornamental wife who won't complain, which perfectly describes the agreeable Lisette. Understanding the harsh reality, she figures he simply targeted the unassuming wallflower he spotted at that social gathering. The heavy conversation is abruptly interrupted when Lisette's two adorable younger sisters, Amelia and Blanca, peek into the study. Gently patting their heads, a smiling Lisette promises her eager sisters that she will play with them in just a little while. A close-up of Lisette's eyes reveals a deep, resolute determination forming behind her gentle, sisterly demeanor. Sweating under the pressure, her distressed father laments that their family is a fallen noble house in name only. Turning toward the door, Lisette confirms that accepting this marriage will secure much-needed financial support for their struggling family. She silently resolves to endure whatever comes to prepare a safe environment where her young sisters can live without hardship. Offering a reassuring smile to her worried father, Lisette boldly and definitively accepts the Marquis' marriage proposal. She absolutely refuses to let her weary father bear the family's crushing burdens all by himself. Standing tall before her family, she firmly declares that she is marrying into the Salvert family entirely of her own volition. Back at the altar, the lonely bride closes her eyes, feeling that this absent groom treatment is far too harsh even for an arranged marriage. Sweating nervously, the priest hesitantly asks if they are truly holding the sacred ceremony while the groom is completely absent. Orlando, the Salvert house head steward, sternly commands the priest to proceed because it is the master's express intention. Lisette's internal monologue reveals that while she prepared herself for a loveless marriage, this utter humiliation is pushing her limits. Flustered but compliant, the priest formally begins the vows, awkwardly addressing the empty space where Lord Leonardo should be standing. The priest recites the traditional vows, asking the absent groom to swear his lifelong devotion through sickness and health. An awkward silence fills the grand church as the solitary bride stands before the altar while the steward prepares to speak. Stepping up without hesitation, the stoic steward solemnly declares that his master swears to everything the priest just said. Internally screaming, Lisette desperately wonders if this humiliating ordeal is actually some sort of twisted trial to enter the Salvert family. The priest fumbles through the rest of the ceremony, prompting a flustered Lisette to hastily swear her own vows to the proxy. Addressing the bride directly, the priest finalizes the vows as a sweat-dropping Lisette hastily agrees to her end of the bargain. She stands in complete silence, a single drop of sweat highlighting her profound awkwardness as the reality of her wedding sets in. In the background, her father weeps profusely, utterly overwhelmed by the tragic absurdity of his precious daughter's wedding day. Her weeping mother angrily agrees that this treatment is far too cruel, especially since the Marquis's own family is also absent. Lisette admits to herself that she is incredibly anxious about the future since she hasn't even met the man she just married. Through her tears, her mother pleads with Lisette not to force herself, reminding her that she doesn't have to go through with this. Outraged, her mother loudly declares that the real problem is the sheer disrespect of the groom, not even showing up to the wedding. Putting on a brave, smiling face, Lisette turns to her weeping mother and confidently vows to surely capture her absent husband's heart. Still crying into her handkerchief, her mother proudly acknowledges that Lisette has always taken excellent care of her sisters and is their pride and joy. An infuriated noblewoman furiously screams about being treated like a toy, while her dismissive target simply complains that his ears hurt. Remembering her father's heartfelt plea to return home anytime if things go wrong, Lisette braces herself for her new life. Smiling warmly through her apprehension, the beautiful bride recalls her mother's final instruction to remain graceful in her new household. Standing outside the grand church, Lisette confidently vows to act like a true noble and capture her new husband's heart. Meanwhile, at a bustling workplace, a massive stack of paperwork is unceremoniously dropped onto a subordinate's desk. Staring in despair, Nicholas Ackerson silently panics because his furious wife will definitely lock him out if he comes home late again. Desperate to escape the crushing workload, the frantic subordinate shouts for Lord Leonardo to wait. Nicholas passionately argues that a woman's heart is dangerously complicated and mysterious. Looking back with cold indifference, Leonardo mocks his subordinate's fear and suggests he should have chosen a more easily manageable wife. Utterly confused by the arrogant statement, Nicholas asks what his superior means, only for Leonardo to casually reveal he already found an obedient woman. Brushing his hair aside, Leonardo nonchalantly announces he got married yesterday, leaving a completely shocked Nicholas screaming about not being invited. The oblivious Marquis casually explains that it was a simple family ceremony and he did not even bother attending his own wedding. A suffocating, utterly dumbfounded silence fills the room as Nicholas processes this wildly disrespectful revelation. Pointing an accusatory finger, the exasperated subordinate loudly declares that Lord Leonardo is the absolute worst. Resting his chin on his hand, the completely unapologetic Marquis looks back with a look of mild annoyance. Nicholas furiously lectures his boss that abandoning a bride on her wedding day is an unforgivable way to treat new family. Offering a cold, cynical smirk, the aloof nobleman quietly questions the very concept of family. Leonardo justifies his absence by explaining that the crown prince unexpectedly summoned him right before the ceremony. Gesturing to his massive workload, Leonardo insists he simply does not have the time to care for a demanding wife. Sweating profusely, the terrified subordinate warns his arrogant boss that scorned women are far crueler than actual devils. Leonardo listens silently as Nicholas passionately insists that underestimating a woman will quickly lead to a painful and terrifying experience. On her second morning as a married woman, Lisette stands completely alone in the massive, quiet corridors of the Salvert estate. She quietly reflects that her husband never even showed up for their wedding night, leaving her anxiously waiting for a man she has never met. Greeting the approaching head steward with a polite smile, the hopeful bride asks if she can finally meet her new husband. Her hopeful smile falters into a strained grimace upon hearing that the Marquis has already departed. Maintaining his strict, professional demeanor, Orlando coldly informs her that the master left for work hours before dawn. Desperate to prove her worth, Lisette apologizes for missing him and promises to wake up even earlier tomorrow to properly see him off. With his eyes firmly shut, the steward politely but firmly rejects her offer, telling her to simply rest at her leisure. When she eagerly asks to learn about her new household duties, Orlando completely shuts her down, claiming the master explicitly ordered them not to burden her. Confused by her lack of responsibilities, a sweating Lisette asks what she is supposed to do, prompting Orlando to gesture toward a waiting maid. Following the silent, mysterious maid down a long stone corridor, the uneasy bride attempts to strike up a conversation. Staring at the servant's back, Lisette introduces herself while internally noting that she strangely cannot read the maid's emotional state. The sharply dressed maid finally turns around and formally introduces herself as Lisette's newly assigned personal attendant. Filled with mounting anxiety, the isolated bride seriously doubts her ability to survive the cold, unfeeling atmosphere of the Salvert household, and wordlessly pushes open a set of heavy double doors, revealing the grand space prepared specifically for the new mistress. Stepping into the sunlit room, Lisette gasps in awe at a lavishly decorated studio and asks what this beautiful space is for. The attentive maid generously informs her that she can use the room freely and that any missing supplies will be immediately replenished, gesturing toward the massive collection of expensive fabrics and threads, and explains that the master specifically prepared these tools for her hobby. Looking at the overwhelming display of thread, Lisette quietly admits that she does indeed practice handicrafts as a personal hobby. Sitting alone in a luxurious chair to sew, she realizes that while this is normal bridal training, the lady of the house should not be spending her entire day crafting. The horrifying reality sets in as she concludes her husband wants her to silently craft until she dies, requiring absolutely nothing from her as a functioning wife. Staring blankly at the massive wooden shelf of supplies, the lonely bride finally understands the true, isolating nature of her arranged marriage. Refusing to be broken by this gilded cage, she remembers her promise to her parents and vows to gracefully force her absent husband to look her way. A fierce, unwavering determination ignites in her beautiful eyes as she completely casts aside her previous anxieties. Channeling her fighting spirit, the resilient bride formulates a brilliant plan to make the elusive Marquis desperately want to see her. Turning back to the lavish supplies with a scheming smile, she confidently notes that she can make highly effective use of these wonderful tools. Calling out to her new maid, she prompts a highly confused and to question what the new mistress means by effective use. Flashing a terrifyingly bright and cheerful smile, Lisette happily tells the bewildered servant that she looks forward to working with her. Completely unnerved by her mistress's sudden, intimidating shift in energy, and nervously stammers out an affirmative reply. Narrowing her sharp eyes with tactical precision, the underestimated wallflower prepares to launch her ultimate counterattack against her neglectful husband. Standing resolute at the doorway, Lisette decides to take the initiative by making the mansion's people turn her way. 3 days after her wedding ceremony, she resolves to close the distance with the servants in order to finally meet her elusive husband. Pausing with a blank stare, she realizes there is one glaring problem with her optimistic plan. She confidently strides down the grand, sunlit corridor as a solitary maid approaches from the distance. Lisette cheerfully offers a good morning, causing the startled maid to flinch and nervously stutter a reply. Ignoring the friendly gesture, the maid quickly bows and scurries away, leaving Lisette with a strained, awkward smile. Staring blankly ahead with deadpan eyes, Lisette bluntly concludes that there is absolutely no opening to talk to them. Walking alone, she wonders if this flawless yet stiff behavior among the servants is actually the master's influence. Her thoughts are interrupted when a maid panics and falls, prompting Lisette to gently point out that she is bleeding a little. Peering down at the clumsy girl, Lisette immediately recognizes her as Anne, the same maid from earlier. Looking up with tearful eyes, Anne frantically apologizes for causing trouble and offers to compensate if she stains the offered handkerchief. Without hesitation, Lisette presses the cloth firmly against the injury and instructs the flustered maid to hold it there. Glancing down at the fabric, Anne suddenly recoils in sheer terror and questions what the bizarre creature is. While Lisette finds the squid otter cute, and stares at it in disgusted disbelief, calling the tentacled monstrosity gross. Anne kneels silently on the floor, clutching the strange handkerchief over her bleeding knee. Shuddering in horror, Anne listens as Lisette enthusiastically explains how the creature uses its tentacles to crack open and eat shells. Regaining her formal composure, Anne advises Lisette to change the bad taste design and promises to wash and reuse the cloth without needing compensation. As Anne bows and respectfully retreats down the hall, Lisette sits defeated on the floor, feeling like she is the one being preyed upon by her own squid otter. Lisette silently watches the maid walk away, a thoughtful look crossing her face. Rising to her feet, she notes with a hint of intrigue that Anne is quite an unusual person. A sudden spark of inspiration hits Lisette, realizing that she might be able to use this quirky interaction to her advantage. Later in a sunlit room, Anne approaches with formal posture and respectfully asks Lady Lisette if she would like some tea. Smiling warmly at the gesture, Lisette thanks Anne and sets aside her embroidery to eat. As she serves the tea, Anne mentally observes that Lady Lisette is shut in alone doing embroidery again today. Breaking the heavy silence, Lisette takes a sip with a bright smile and cheerfully praises the delicious tea. attempting to offer comfort, and explains that Lizette's restlessness cannot be helped because the atmosphere of the Salvert house is entirely unique. She reveals the previous Marquis taught the servants to work mechanically, strictly forbidding personal feelings from interfering in front of the master. Staring out at the massive estate, and adds that this oppressive atmosphere has not changed even after Lord Leonardo succeeded as the head of the family. Lowering her gaze respectfully, and assures the new bride that she will get used to the isolation soon. Turning her back to leave, the maid softly acknowledges that it might be hard to bear for Lady Lisette since she just arrived at the mansion. Muttering that it was just as hard for her initially, and bows slightly and asks to be excused. Just as she opens the door, and freezes at the sight of the squid otter cloth, prompting Lisette to desperately ask her to wait. Spinning around with a shocked gasp, and points incredulously at the bizarre handkerchief sitting on the table. Seizing the sudden opening, Lisette nervously stammers and asks if Anne is busy because she has something to talk about. Scolding herself for being uncharacteristically distracted, and turns back and hesitantly asks what kind of business the lady has. Sweating nervously, Anne braces herself and wonders if there is some mistake in her work that she is about to be reprimanded for. Leaning in with sparkling eyes, Lisette shatters the tension by bluntly asking if the master is an unidentified mysterious animal, leaving and utterly baffled. Lisette rambles enthusiastically, wondering if her husband is a bounty-hunted phantom creature or a rare spirit that brings happiness within 3 days of being witnessed. Completely dumbfounded by the sheer absurdity, and stares blankly and asks her to repeat the part about the unidentified mysterious animal. Forcing herself to stay calm, and answers Lizette's relentless questioning by stating she has served the Salvert family for 6 years. Catching a brief break in the maid's rigid composure, Lisette quickly asks if she just laughed, a claim, and immediately denies. Covering her mouth, and explains that opportunities to see the master are so rare even among servants that there is a popular jinx about him bringing good luck. When pressed if she has actually seen his face during those 6 years, and hesitates for a moment before confirming she has. Clasping her hands in pure delight, Lisette bursts into bright laughter, overjoyed that the master really is being treated like a rare beast. Breaking her stoic facade, and glares at the giggling bride for treating the lord like a beast and points out that she definitely just laughed. Placing her hand gently over the embroidery, Lisette sincerely apologizes for saying something strange, admitting she was just happy to talk to someone after so long. Hiding her embarrassed smile behind her teacup, Lisette playfully offers the squid otter handkerchief as a sign of their new acquaintance. Recoiling in utter bewilderment, and blurts out a shocked apology, admitting she honestly thought the bizarre design was something meant for children. Smiling proudly, Lisette asks her to wait and explains she sewed it out of habit because her little sisters at her parents' house always begged for them. Shocked by the craftsmanship, and admits she thought it was a limited edition store-bought item, leading Lisette to happily declare that she is good at sewing. Lisette pauses her work as Anne nervously fidgets and asks if she could have the squid otter pattern. Lisette begins to politely offer it to her before suddenly stopping herself. Dropping her polite facade, Lisette firmly states that she cannot simply give the pattern away for free. She slyly admits that their earlier conversation made her inevitably eager to finally take a look at the mansion's rare beast. Clasping her hands together with a dazzling smile, Lisette playfully asks if Anne wants to see the master too. Staring back in deadpan shock, and quickly realizes her mistress is trying to bribe her with a mere handkerchief. Breaking the silence with a dry chuckle, and bluntly points out the absurdity of the situation. She stares directly at her mistress and notes that Lisette actually intends to bribe her with a squid otter. Unfazed by the deadpan reaction, Lisette beams a bright and cheerful smile. She smoothly compliments the maid by noting she did not look like the type to be swayed by monetary things anyway. Lisette holds out the bizarre handkerchief, extending her offer and asking if the maid will accept it, and stares intently at the embroidered squid otter, quietly contemplating the strange bribe. Gripping the fabric tightly against her chest, and bows her head in quiet contemplation. She internally reflects on her misjudgment, having initially thought her new mistress was a quiet and reserved person. Looking up with a subtle and intrigued smirk, and formally accepts the bribe and the alliance. She realizes this unpredictable bride might be exactly the kind of person who calls a storm to the stagnant Salvert house. Sealing their new partnership, Lisette closes her eyes and beams a gentle, radiant smile. The bright expression perfectly masks the mischievous plotting happening beneath the surface. Lisette peacefully acknowledges their agreement, but Anne quickly grounds her expectations. The pragmatic maid warns that the Salvert family's rare beast is notoriously busy and will certainly not be caught so easily. Completely undeterred by the challenge, Lisette raises a confident finger and flashes a brilliant smile. She happily declares that she already has a foolproof strategy for capturing the elusive rare beast. A few days pass in quiet preparation at the grand estate. The massive Salvert mansion stands stoically under the shifting clouds, entirely unaware of the trap being laid inside. Heavy and confident footsteps echo through the quiet halls. Polished black boots stride purposefully across the pristine floorboards as the elusive master finally makes his return. Adjusting his elegant collar, Leonardo Salvert formally arrives as his loyal butler Orlando bows in greeting. Wasting no time on pleasantries, the stern lord immediately asks where his new wife is. Standing at attention, Orlando notes that the master has returned surprisingly early today. He respectfully reports that Lady Lisette finished her meal and has already retired to her room. Leonardo receives the mundane report with a stoic and unbothered expression. Watching his master, Orlando quietly assumes that Lady Lisette has properly understood her isolated position in the household. Lowering his gaze with a hint of quiet resignation, Leonardo processes the news. He pragmatically assumes his new bride has finally given up on expecting any attention or affection from him. Staring toward the grand staircase, Leonardo reflects on his brief glimpses of her. He remembers how she looked like she was earnestly trying to see him off just this morning. Taking a heavy step forward, his polished boot strikes the floor as he contemplates his obligations. He begrudgingly realizes that, before long, he will probably have to officially present her to society. Despite the inconvenience, Leonardo finds a silver lining in his arranged marriage. He admits that finally being released from the relentless nobles trying to push their daughters onto him makes him feel genuinely refreshed. Suddenly, Leonardo halts in his tracks as his eye widens in sheer confusion. He recalls that Nicholas had thoroughly warned him about something, but he had completely dismissed it as trivial. Leonardo stops dead in his tracks, his stoic demeanor shattering in an instant. He stands completely frozen in the hallway, staring blankly ahead in absolute and unadulterated shock. Trembling with confusion, he stares at the inexplicable sight laid out before him. His mind races as he struggles to comprehend exactly what he is looking at. Sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, Orlando quickly rushes up behind his frozen master. The composed butler loses his bearing and frantically stammers, asking what is going on. Staring at the heavily decorated entrance to his private quarters, Leonardo demands answers. He turns his intense gaze toward Orlando and asks what on earth this place is. Sweating nervously under the intense questioning, Orlando rapidly denies any involvement. He firmly explains that the servants would never dare change the interior of the master's room without explicit permission. Taking an aggressive step forward, Leonardo's eyes narrow in sharp realization. Putting the pieces together, he deduces that this bizarre sabotage must be Lisette Craig's doing. Throwing his bedroom door open with a violent slam, Leonardo storms inside with burning fury. He angrily shouts Lisette's full name and demands to know the meaning of this handiwork as a startled shriek echoes from the bed. Startled by the sudden intrusion, Lisette spins around in sheer terror. Her mind races as she looks at the imposing intruder, quickly realizing this furious man must be Leonardo Salvert. Trembling like a frightened rabbit, Lisette quickly hides behind her loyal maid. She frantically cries out that there is a dangerous stranger in the room and attempts to calm her down. Remaining perfectly composed amidst the chaos, and turns to her terrified mistress. With a deadpan expression, she bluntly informs Lisette that the scary intruder is actually her husband. The sheer terror instantly vanishes from Lisette's face, replaced by a look of pleasant surprise. She drops her defensive posture and cheerfully asks the furious man if he really is her husband. Stepping gracefully across the absurdly decorated floorboards, Lisette regains her aristocratic composure. She politely apologizes for her earlier rudeness and formally asks if he is indeed Leonardo Salvert. Leonardo flushes red with sheer exasperation, unable to believe her blatant audacity. He angrily points out that not only did she call him an intruder, but she apparently did not even know her own husband's face. Completely unfazed by his shouting, Lisette smiles smoothly and places a hand on her chest. She innocently explains that since he skipped their wedding, she does not have much memory of him, smoothly asking to greet him properly. Standing directly before the stunned Marquis, she offers a perfect and graceful curtsy. She confidently introduces herself as Lisette Craig, a woman whose hobby is handicrafts, and warmly welcomes her new husband. Quickly correcting herself with a sly and triumphant smile, she states her name is officially Lisette Salvert now. Looking up into his bewildered eyes, she declares that she looks forward to their acquaintance from now on. Utterly defeated by her flawless evasion, Leonardo aggressively clicks his tongue in sheer frustration. He glares down at his entirely unbothered bride while Orlando sweats nervously in the doorway. Turning her back on her irritated husband, Lisette pumps her fists in sheer celebration. She completely ignores the Lord and happily declares too and that their rare beast capture operation was a huge success. Celebrating their flawless victory, the mistress and the maid raise their hands together. They share a loud and triumphant high-five right in front of the completely bewildered Marquis. Covering her mouth to hide a remarkably smug smile, and softly chuckles at the absurdity of it all. She quietly admits to Lisette that she is also thrilled to have witnessed the unidentified mysterious animal's shocked face. A brief flashback reveals the sheer simplicity of their devious strategy to force an interaction. They deliberately decorated the master's living quarters with bizarre lace handicrafts just to draw out a single complaint. Reflecting on the ease of their trap, Lisette smiles warmly at her new accomplice. She is genuinely glad that and is someone who plays along so perfectly with such a ridiculous operation. Looking forward to their future antics, Lisette cheerfully declares they should continue doing their best starting tomorrow. Standing firmly by her side, and agrees that these tactics fall perfectly within the realm of cute pranks. Standing proudly in the hallway beside another maid, and watches the chaotic fallout of their plan. She confidently notes that this is not just a one-day operation and their campaign has only just begun. Retreating into his private quarters, Leonardo collapses into an absurdly decorated and lace-covered chair. He furiously mutters Lisette's maiden name under his breath as the heavy door slams shut. The servants observe the new bride with a mixture of awe and caution. They realize that, despite her shy reputation at parties, she shrewdly managed to get the head maid entirely on her side. Standing beside the exhausted lord, Orlando dramatically warns him about the true nature of his new bride. He intensely preaches that a woman's calculated anger is far more terrifying than any divine punishment. Sweating profusely under the weight of his bizarre new reality, Leonardo stares blankly ahead. He grimly admits to himself that this forced marriage has rapidly become an absolute nightmare. Tucked miserably into a bed violently covered in frilly lace and massive ribbons, Leonardo seethes in the dark. He angrily curses Lisette's name and vows to make her clean up every single piece of it tomorrow. The wife cheerfully greets her husband with a warm good morning. Chapter 3 begins as she opens the door to find her husband standing rigidly in the hallway. She wonders if he was actually waiting for her to come out. She realizes that until yesterday, they couldn't even exchange simple morning greetings. Brushing off her surprise, he bluntly states he finished in his room and is leaving. He then politely asks if she has finished her breakfast and invites her to join him. Looking noticeably troubled, he strictly commands her to collect all the lace currently decorating his room. She correctly deduces that his room is still covered in her decorations. She realizes he came specifically to warn her about the lingering mess. She giggles at the comical thought of him eating breakfast in that ridiculous room. Annoyed by her amusement, he demands to know what she is laughing at. Smiling warmly, she ignores his irritation and wishes him a safe trip. He awkwardly accepts her farewell and formally takes his leave. Walking down the hallway with her maid the wife apologizes for making her help with the cleanup and kindly reassures her that the task is actually quite fun. The wife suddenly stops in her tracks, staring ahead in complete surprise. Standing in the room are the head maid Teresia and another maid named Reina. Confused by their presence, the wife asks and why those people are here. Teresia formally addresses the lady of the house as she prepares to speak. Stuttering slightly, the wife nervously addresses the head maid. Teresia insists that the staff shall handle the cleanup and that the lady does not need to be present. Stepping forward with a severe expression, Teresia declares she has something to say. She brings up the specific incident that occurred yesterday. The wife panics internally, assuming the older woman is angry that a newcomer caused trouble in the household. She nervously tries to take responsibility for her actions. Breaking her stern facade, Teresia surprisingly declares that the prank was absolutely magnificent. Both the wife and stare at the head maid in utterly stunned silence. Teresia explains she has long felt uncomfortable with the master's behavior towards the wife. Because of this, she found yesterday's chaotic events quite satisfying. She passionately admits it was the very first time she had ever seen such a human expression on the master's face. and teasingly points out that Teresia's scary resting face is highly misleading. The head maid sharply retorts that she doesn't want to hear that from her. Teresia confesses the house used to be suffocatingly quiet. She joyfully notes that yesterday felt like the ventilation had finally improved. Smiling warmly alongside Reina, the head maid formally asks the lady to let the staff help her with her plans. The wife's eyes widen in surprise before softening into a deeply relieved smile. Gladly accepting their alliance, she asks if they would be willing to help her execute a new idea. The unified group of women stand together in the now clean room. Wiping sweat from her forehead, Reina notes it feels clean now but admits it is somewhat ashamed to see the chaotic decorations go. The wife enthusiastically agrees and instructs and to bring out the new things she prepared. Presenting a room absolutely covered in realistic-looking blood splatters, she boasts about how nice her new handiwork looks. The maids stare in absolute, wide-eyed horror at the gruesome horror motif. Winking playfully, the wife points out that her husband only told her to clean up yesterday's specific decorations. She cleverly notes he never actually forbade putting up new ones. The horrifying new aesthetic is proudly revealed to be a horror house motif. She confidently states she must do at least this much to get a reaction. A sweating maid praises her terrifying nerves of steel for setting this up day after day. Teresia and the other maids stare silently, utterly bewildered by the extreme escalation. Later that day, someone approaches the grand exterior windows of the estate. The husband returns to find the bloody mess and fiercely demands to know the meaning of this disaster. Unfazed, she welcomes him home but boldly reminds him to knock before entering a lady's room. He aggressively shoves a piece of the blood-stained lace in her face and demands she stop playing dumb. Completely ignoring his outrage, she excitedly explains how she wove 3 colors together for a 3-dimensional effect. She praises him for wonderfully noticing her difficult artistic process. She claps her hands in delight, praising his keen observation skills. Trembling with frustration, he clarifies he wasn't complimenting her tasteless blood-splatter decorations. He loudly reminds her he ordered all the lace completely removed. Leaning in menacingly, she whispers that she mixed in threads dyed with her own blood. He recoils in absolute terror at her morbid confession. Seeing his thoroughly disgusted face, she cheerfully waves her hand and reveals it was obviously just a joke. He demands to know why she does such childish things. She retorts that calling it childish is offensive before curiously asking why he thinks she acts this way. He stares at her in stunned silence, struggling to formulate a logical response. Recovering his voice, he bitterly assumes she goes to these lengths because she genuinely hates him. Looking at him with earnest innocence, she flatly denies this. She states plainly that she does not know him well enough to hate him. He pauses completely, his eyes widening as her surprisingly honest words sink in. Shaking off the vulnerable moment, he strictly orders her to stop playing pranks in his room immediately. She immediately plays dumb again, pretending not to understand his anger. Reaching the absolute end of his patience, he loudly declares that putting up new decorations is also strictly forbidden. Defeated but smiling brightly, she happily agrees and cheerfully accepts his new rule. A furious voice echoes over the grand estate, screaming Lizette Craig's name into the open air. 2 days later, a horrified shriek demands to know the meaning of the absolute disaster before them. The very next day, the husband shrieks in pure terror as terrifying fake spiders suddenly drop from the ceiling. Utterly defeated by the relentless pranks, he covers his face in sheer exhaustion and lets out a bewildered gasp. Looking absolutely drained with dark bags under his eyes, he wonders aloud if he had just been sighing. Someone nearby immediately notices his dreadful state and asks if he is truly all right. His subordinate, Nicholas, approaches with a concerned expression to ask what could possibly have Lord Leonardo sighing so heavily. Smiling kindly, Nicholas gently suggests that venting about his worries might make the troubled lord feel a bit better. Leonardo awkwardly deflects the offer, prompting Nicholas to hesitantly ask if things are going well with his new wife. Instantly dropping his polite concern, Nicholas adopts a smug, teasing grin and openly mocks Leonardo for struggling after talking so big. Waving his hand dismissively, Nicholas laughs that it is perfectly natural for a bride to give the silent treatment after being abandoned at her own wedding. Leonardo immediately corrects his subordinate's assumption, clarifying with deep dread that his wife's silence is definitely not the issue. He solemnly declares the harsh reality of his current domestic situation. Leonardo miserably laments his wife's incredibly realistic, heart-stopping handicraft skills and her refusal to stop the terrifying pranks. He admits the mere thought of her next trap leaves him deeply depressed, prompting Nicholas to desperately stifle a snort. Utterly failing to hold back, Nicholas bursts into uproarious laughter at the sheer absurdity of a man of Lord Leonardo's high stature losing all his dignity. Furious at the betrayal, Leonardo glares as Nicholas absolutely loses his mind over the hilarious contrast between the formidable boss at work and the helpless husband at home. The Lord angrily yells at his subordinate for mocking the serious worries he just confided. Regaining his composure, Nicholas proudly reminds his boss of his previous warning that a woman's wrath is vastly more terrifying than divine punishment itself. Reluctantly swallowing his pride, Leonardo admits to himself that he is completely unable to handle his wife's relentless onslaught. Desperate for a solution, he commands his subordinate to stop preaching and start thinking of at least one viable countermeasure to survive. Nicholas smoothly points out that the perpetually overworked Lord desperately needs this kind of silly, chaotic interaction to bring some life into his rigid routine. Tapping his head in thought, Nicholas casually suggests a brilliantly simple countermeasure. He advises Leonardo to simply go home early before his wife has the chance to set up her next elaborate trap. Leonardo's eyes narrow sharply as he absorbs the strategic brilliance of the plan. Noticing his boss's terrifyingly serious reaction, a sweating Nicholas nervously stammers that his suggestion was entirely meant as a joke. Completely ignoring his subordinate's backpedaling, Leonardo aggressively formulates his counterattack. Realizing he can't stop him, Nicholas shrugs and notes that Leonardo has the schedule leeway to pull this off. Striking while the iron is hot, Leonardo abruptly abandons his post and storms off toward his estate, leaving Nicholas entirely in charge of the remaining work. Arriving at the grand estate completely unannounced, Leonardo startles the unsuspecting maids with his sudden presence. The flustered staff whispers about his surprisingly early return before the sun has even set. He strides past them with commanding authority, claiming he simply finished his work early. His polished leather shoes strike the pristine floors with purposeful, heavy steps as he marches straight toward the battlefield. Outside the towering mansion, rumors continue to swirl about the master's surprisingly formidable new wife. Reaching his destination, he violently throws open the heavy double doors with absolute determination. To his immense relief, the grand bedroom remains pristine and utterly untouched by any terrifying decorations. A victorious smirk spreads across his face as he realizes he successfully beat her to the punch. His momentary triumph is interrupted by his wife's confused voice calling out to him from the hallway. He turns around with an aura of absolute smugness to face his thoroughly surprised wife. Taunting her mercilessly, he gloats that her plan to put strange things in his room has been completely thwarted. Recovering from her shock, she innocently asks if his massive workload is already finished for the day. He haughtily claims that even he returns early when his affairs are properly sorted. Covering her mouth with a delicate hand, she giggles shamelessly and openly admits that she has been caught red-handed. Her eyes suddenly sparkle with pure, unadulterated delight as a new thought crosses her mind. He misinterprets her reaction, foolishly believing he has finally won their battle of wits. Smiling radiantly, she warmly insists that he take the rest of the day to finally rest and properly recover from his exhaustion. Catching him completely off guard, she cheerfully invites him to share a proper dinner together since he is finally home early. He instantly shoots down the invitation with a cold refusal, stating he will eat alone in his room. She sighs dramatically, playfully lamenting what a terrible shame his rejection is. Annoyed by her lack of resistance, he suspiciously points out that she is backing down far too easily. Glancing at the basket of unused pranks in her hands, he asks if she feels frustrated that he ruined all her hard work and preparation. Instead of showing anger, she simply offers a mysterious, knowing chuckle. Staring intently at his stern face, she suddenly brings up his earlier demand to know why she orchestrates these elaborate pranks. He confidently assumes she acts out because she is deeply dissatisfied with him, labeling her behavior as blatant harassment. Dropping her mischievous act, she gently confesses that her only goal was to force him into having a real conversation with her. She softly explains that since she achieved her goal today, the silly pranks are entirely unnecessary. Bowing gracefully, she excuses herself and tells him to take his time resting. He lets out a completely dumbfounded noise as her honest confession shatters his defenses. He stands utterly frozen in the grand doorway, his mind struggling to process the devastatingly simple truth behind her actions. A bright red flush aggressively overtakes his face as her sincere, heartwarming words finally sink in. Left completely alone in his pristine bedroom, the thoroughly flustered lord helplessly stammers into the empty air. Tossing in his sleep, a young boy pants heavily as sweat beads on his flushed face. An older, impeccably dressed man stares down with a distressed expression, murmuring a quiet question of why. The feverish boy continues to suffer, his breath catching in his throat as a deep blush stains his cheeks. Two elegant adults, presumably his parents, turn their backs to him without a word. Reaching out from under the covers, the desperate child begs to know why his father and mother will not stay by his side. Suddenly, a pair of wide, panicked eyes snap open. A blond young man, Leonardo, sits up in bed drenched in cold sweat, realizing the agonizing memory was merely a dream. Sunlight bathes the exterior of a grand, Gothic-style estate, signaling the start of a new day. Striding down the hall, Lord Leonardo snaps that it is none of their business when his trailing aides ask if he is sleep-deprived again due to the terrible bags under his eyes. His freckled companion bluntly points out that he works too much and begs the Lord to take a rest once in a while. Closing his eyes in quiet resignation, Leonardo sighs and mutters that it is the same as always. Elsewhere, a maid peeks through a doorway to ask a long-haired woman what happened with her lady's recent pranks. Leonardo explains that he only managed to prevent the schemes on the day he returned early, but when he is late, his wife cooperates with the maids to ensure something is set up. The spectacled maid recalls her lady mentioning she would donate her rapidly piling embroidery to the church bazaar. Stealing his resolve, the aide warns Lord Leonardo to brace himself for their upcoming meeting because they are surrounded by nothing but enemies in the House of Lords. While the freckled aide gleefully thinks the challenge sounds fun, his colleague demands to know what part of it is enjoyable. With a sharp gaze, Leonardo states he fully intends to brace himself, recognizing that as a novice head of a marquis family, he is an easy target in these meetings. He grimaces, admitting that being constantly nitpicked over unrelated matters is simply unbearable. Pausing in the corridor, he acknowledges the difficulty but notes he has thoroughly prepared for the onslaught. Suddenly, an older, distinguished gentleman approaches, prompting Leonardo to stiffen as he recognizes Duke Asperion. Accompanied by his aides, Leonardo politely greets Marquis Salvert and the approaching noble. Inwardly groaning, Leonardo identifies Duke Asperion as the leader of the troublesome lot who relentlessly finds fault with his actions. Shaking hands, the Duke pleasantly states he looks forward to the session today, leaving Leonardo utterly baffled as he wonders if the man has ever spoken to him before a meeting. Duke Asperion smoothly apologizes for bothering him before the session, triggering Leonardo's deep suspicion about his true aim. Leonardo freezes in pure shock when the notoriously difficult Duke declares he actually wants to thank him. Maintaining a gentle smile, the older man casually brings up the fact that he heard Leonardo got married recently. Stepping closer, Duke Asperion reveals that the entire reason he called out to him today was to offer his sincere gratitude. He explains that his wife received a stole and is absolutely overjoyed about the gift. Stroking his chin fondly, the Duke recounts how his wife apparently met Leonardo's wife at the bazaar yesterday. Still struggling to process the interaction, Leonardo repeats the word stole in quiet disbelief. The Duke praises the stole as a magnificent piece of work, confirming he heard it was handmade by Leonardo's wife. Chuckling softly, he adds that his wife is already fiercely enthusiastic about wearing the beautiful garment to their next party. Sweating nervously, a dumbfounded Leonardo manages a shaky confirmation. Beaming with genuine warmth, Duke Asperion notes his wife has taken a liking to Leonardo's bride and is in a wonderfully good mood, prompting him to ask Leonardo to pass along his regards. The older man smiles brightly, reiterating that this unexpected joy is exactly why he wanted to thank him. Recovering slightly from the shock, Leonardo politely accepts the gratitude. Before departing, the Duke warmly requests that Leonardo introduce his talented wife to him next time. Bowing respectfully, Leonardo thanks the Duke for going out of his way to tell him, though he remains utterly bewildered by the exchange. Left alone in the corridor, Leonardo and his aides stare blankly, agreeing they have never seen the imposing Duke in such a good mood. The freckled aide happily declares this a great achievement for their lady, reminding his master that Duke Asperion is famous for being a highly devoted husband. Staring at the heavy wooden doors of the meeting chamber, Leonardo concedes that it certainly seems so. Dark clouds begin to roll over the silhouette of the trees as evening approaches. Returning to his grand estate under the twilight sky, Leonardo is promptly welcomed home as master. A subordinate swiftly reports that they have already collected the item in question, assuring him there is no problem. Removing his jacket in the grand foyer, Leonardo asks his attendant how the handling of Lizette's latest trap is going. He mentally credits Orlando for dutifully collecting the pranks as soon as he finds them, a countermeasure Leonardo put in place a few days ago. Glancing at the ornate doors of his manor, he knows he has only managed to escape the damage for a little while. Pinching the bridge of his nose, Leonardo narrows his eyes and admits that defeating her schemes somehow feels far too easy. When he demands to know her whereabouts, his attendant quickly reports that she returned to her room a while ago and is likely already asleep. Dismissing the servant with a quiet word of praise, Leonardo prepares to investigate the suspiciously quiet manor himself. Lisette offers a bright, innocent smile. The Duke observes her curious behavior from the shelter of the staircase. His loyal butler stands attentively by his side, watching the scene unfold. They both wonder what thoughts hide behind her cheerful demeanor. The butler breaks the silence to discuss her daily routine. He carefully details how she spends her time when the sun is up. The Duke listens intently to the report. He prepares to analyze her supposedly innocent actions. The Duke looks back over his shoulder with a deeply suspicious glare. He directly questions what exactly Lisette is doing out there. His mind races with paranoid theories regarding her true intentions. He refuses to believe she is simply enjoying the weather. He expresses his total dismay at her seemingly frivolous lifestyle. He wonders aloud if she devotes her time every day solely to setting up elaborate pranks. He admits he is just appalled by her lack of noble decorum. The butler reacts with mild surprise to his master's harsh assessment. The butler quickly steps in to defend the young lady's honor. He explains that there are times she peacefully admires flowers in the garden too. He also points out that she often spends her time doing quiet handicrafts. He insists her days are not entirely filled with mischief. Continuing his defense, the butler reminds the Duke of her highborn status. He states confidently that as a noble's daughter, she must be fully aware of how to interact with servants. He implies her behavior is likely a calculated choice rather than pure ignorance. The Duke absorbs this rational perspective silently. The Duke dismisses the concern with a wave, stating that her garden habit is fine. The butler presses on, noting that they also see her having tea with the maids. He cautiously asks if he should warn her about breaking class boundaries. The master ponders whether intervention is truly necessary. The butler offers a theory, suggesting perhaps she possesses something unique that naturally attracts people. He notes how effortlessly she integrated herself into the household hierarchy. Before he knew it, starting with the strict head maid, she had won over all the maids. Her charming influence seems completely unstoppable. The butler pauses, choosing his next words with utmost care. He humbly asks the master to forgive his presumption for saying this next statement. He senses a deeper issue plaguing the Duke's mind. The atmosphere grows tense as he prepares to cross a professional line. Looking directly at his master, the butler voices his genuine worry. He bluntly points out that the Duke does not look very well. The dark circles under his eyes reveal his hidden exhaustion. The heavy burden of leadership is clearly taking its toll. The Duke quickly denies any weakness, firmly stating he is fine. He attempts to project his usual aura of unshakable strength. However, a lingering hesitation betrays his confident facade. He turns away to hide his physical and mental fatigue. Refusing to drop the issue, the faithful butler offers a gentle suggestion. He states that perhaps it would be best if the Duke took a break once in a while. He worries that continuous overwork will lead to a complete collapse. The master considers the rare piece of personal advice. Conceding the argument, the Duke decides to finally rest. He states clearly that he will go to sleep now. He offers a quiet thank you to his caring servant. The butler watches him leave with a sense of relief. Startled by the sudden change in demeanor, the butler reacts with confusion. He demands to know what is wrong with his master. He points out that the Duke has been acting strange for a while now. His deep concern resurfaces immediately. The Duke ignores the probing questions entirely. He simply bids his servant a good night and dismisses him. He seeks the solitude of his private chambers to escape the interrogation. The dark windows reflect his heavily burdened soul. The Duke approaches his grand bedroom door, expecting a peaceful sanctuary. He pushes the heavy wood open with a weary sigh. He steps onto the plush carpet, ready to finally collapse. His guard drops as he enters his most secure domain. He glances around the room cautiously, his paranoia briefly flaring up. To his immense relief, he notes that, as expected, there seems to be nothing hidden here. The room appears completely untouched by Lisette's mischievous hands. He lets out a soft breath of temporary victory. The opulent bedroom remains perfectly silent and undisturbed. A large grandfather clock ticks steadily against the far wall. The magnificent canopy bed looks incredibly inviting to the exhausted man. He finally feels safe enough to lower his defenses completely. Undressing for the night, the Duke reflects on the day's bizarre events. He remembers a passing comment expressing genuine surprise by the sudden change in his own attitude. He feels slightly bad for her, but ultimately accepts it as his win today as well. He fully intends to enjoy his perfectly secure rest. Meanwhile, two cheerful maids share a joyful conversation about the household dynamics. One notes that, thanks to Lisette, Duke Esperian's attitude will likely soften. The other marvels to think her actions would influence even the stubborn Duke. They both express a strong desire to thank her for that matter. Back in his chambers, the Duke plans his next diplomatic move. He decides he shall convey his gratitude to her personally. He sets the meeting for tomorrow morning. He envisions her quietly working on her delicate embroidery while they speak. He climbs into bed, fully expecting soft linen against his skin. Instantly, he freezes as his hands brush against coarse threads. He questions what this is, confused because the texture of the sheets feels entirely wrong. A deep sense of dread quickly washes over him. He violently rips the heavy blanket back to uncover the sabotage. The entire underside is covered in incredibly realistic, horrifyingly detailed embroidery. Giant spiders and grotesque beetles are woven perfectly into thick webs. His safe haven has been completely compromised. A look of absolute terror instantly shatters his calm expression. His eyes widen in panic as the embroidered bugs seem to crawl toward him. He lets out a loud, undignified scream of pure shock. The adrenaline forcefully ejects him from the cursed mattress. Standing safely away, he stares down at the intricate trap in utter disgust. He recognizes the craftsmanship as her signature embroidery. The sheer amount of time she dedicated to this prank is staggering. His temporary sense of victory evaporates into furious humiliation. He clenches his fists, his anger boiling over rapidly. He fumes that realistic insects are the one thing he absolutely cannot stand. He declares that even as simple harassment, this malicious act goes far too far. He prepares to confront the chaotic culprit immediately. He aggressively storms down the quiet hallway, completely abandoning his noble composure. He shoves her heavy bedroom door open with tremendous, unrestrained force. The loud crash shatters the peaceful silence of the sleeping manor. He strides inside, demanding immediate answers. He loudly shouts for her attention, ready to unleash his fury. He barks that he has overlooked things until now, but today of all days crosses the line. His tirade echoes off the walls as he glares at her bed. He expects a smug, victorious response. His furious shouting abruptly dies in his throat. He stops dead in his tracks, peering through the dim moonlight. He suddenly realizes the room is completely silent and questions if she is actually asleep. His raging momentum crashes into a wall of unexpected tranquility. He lets out a long, deeply frustrated sigh as his anger fizzles out. He stares at her incredibly peaceful, innocent-looking sleeping face. He logically concludes that to wake her up just to lecture her would make him seem petty. He refuses to give her the satisfaction of a midnight tantrum. As he turns to leave, a massive object near her pillow catches his sharp eye. He leans in closer, bewildered, asking what on earth is this specific book. He wonders if the exhausted prankster actually fell asleep while reading a book. He carefully reaches out to inspect her reading material. His hand brushes against the incredibly thick, heavy cover. The bold title clearly reads, Illustrated Encyclopedia of Rare and Strange Insects. He realizes she meticulously researched his phobia just to ensure maximum psychological damage. The sheer dedication to his torment leaves him speechless. He contemplates his bleak options for the rest of the night. He knows if he asks to have the bedsheets changed at this hour, it would feel like a total defeat. It would also be incredibly vexing to be snickered at by the maids behind his back for being afraid of bugs. His pride flatly refuses to allow that outcome. A horrifying new thought suddenly invades his panicked mind. He stares at the encyclopedia, wondering if she is currently searching for material for her next harassment. He aggressively rejects the dark thought, begging the universe to not tell him that is true. The psychological warfare is breaking his resolve. He desperately tries to find a logical, dignified solution. He knows that even so, if he quietly returns to that cursed bed, he will likely have terrible nightmares. The phantom sensation of crawling bugs makes his skin crawl. He is officially a refugee in his own manor. The adrenaline finally wears off, leaving a crushing wave of fatigue. He rubs his stinging eyes, letting out a pathetic groan. He mumbles that he is just so incredibly sleepy. His usually sharp posture completely crumbles under the weight of exhaustion. He feels his head growing dangerously fuzzy as he reaches his absolute limit. He sways slightly, realizing his physical stamina is completely depleted. Suddenly, a brilliant, desperate idea sparks in his clouded brain. He slowly turns his gaze back toward the center of her room. His heavy eyes lock onto the plush, unoccupied side of the mattress. He reminds himself that there is a perfectly good bed right before his eyes, isn't there? It is guaranteed to be completely free of embroidered spiders. The temptation to collapse overpowers his remaining common sense. He stumbles blindly forward, his body moving completely on its own. He rationalizes his shameful surrender by declaring that what he needs right now is just sleep. All thoughts of propriety, revenge, and boundaries vanish instantly. The soft mattress calls to him like an oasis. He collapses face first into the pillows, completely surrendering to his exhaustion. He refuses to process the absurdity of his current location. He strictly tells himself that he shall think about all the details tomorrow. Within seconds, the darkness claims his conscious mind. The morning sun eventually filters through the heavy curtains. He slowly stirs, his mind slowly booting up from a deep slumber. He recognizes the strange scent of the room and mumbles about this place. The comfortable warmth keeps him anchored to the mattress. Full consciousness crashes into him, bringing a wave of intense regret. He groans internally, realizing what a massive blunder he has committed. However, the undeniable truth is staring him right in the face. He asks himself in disbelief if he really did fall asleep in Lizette's room. He stares at the ceiling, reflecting on his chronic insomnia. Since he succeeded the Marquis title, he hasn't been able to sleep much at all. To his absolute shock, he slept soundly for the first time in ages, and waking up actually feels quite good. The irony of finding peace in enemy territory is profound. He slowly turns his head to observe the sleeping menace beside him. Her chest rises and falls in a steady, calming rhythm. He confesses to himself that until now, he has never slept beside anyone before. The quiet intimacy of the moment violently shakes his ironclad heart. He gazes deeply at her relaxed, innocent profile. The harsh walls he built around his duties seem to miraculously dissolve. He admits that since she arrived, he can no longer think solely about work. She has completely disrupted his orderly, stagnant existence. Oblivious to his profound internal revelation, she shifts under the covers. She lets out a soft, meaningless murmur as she rolls over. The Duke watches her unguarded expression with genuine affection. He thinks to himself what a truly silly face she makes. Slowly, her eyelashes flutter as she begins to wake up. Her eyes open halfway, still heavily clouded by lingering dreams. She stares blankly ahead, completely failing to register the large man lying next to her. The Duke holds his breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The gears in her brain finally click into place. Her eyes blow wide open, pupils shrinking to pinpricks of absolute terror. Her face flushes a deep crimson as the scandalous reality shatters her morning peace. She takes a massive gasp of air to fuel her incoming reaction. She unleashes a deafening, ear-piercing scream that shakes the entire manor. Acting purely on panicked survival instincts, she violently kicks her legs out. Her bare feet connect solidly with his torso. He is launched completely out of the bed like a human cannonball. He hits the floor hard, wincing in sharp physical pain. The violent ejection completely erases his earlier romantic musings. He quickly decides to take back what he said about waking up feeling good. The battlefield has officially been reset. He finds himself wedged upside down between the floor and the bed frame. His dignity is entirely shattered as he sighs in defeat. He loudly proclaims that this is absolutely the worst possible outcome. The daily war of attrition has begun anew.